I'm really excited to dig into this piece of music and talk about it. But first, because there's so much history between the two of you, and it's such a wonderful story, I thought we could begin at the beginning, um, which I understand is St. Petersburg. Gary, you are on tour, and Kirill, you're 12, I believe. So could you both just recall the circumstances around your first encounter?
I let Gary go first, and
Okay.
his
Well,
he was an adult, so his memory is better.
I was taken on my night off to this local Russian jazz festival to meet some local musicians, which normally in most parts of the world I wouldn't have thought that was particularly of interest to me. But every time I've been to Russia, I've had fascinating interactions with the musicians that I get to meet. So I was eager to check this out. And so I was taken backstage, and there was a handful of the musicians who wanted to ask me questions about, what's it like to play with Chick Corea, how do you get your gigs, et cetera. What's it like at Berklee, things like that. But no one spoke English except this 12-year-old youngster who became the unofficial translator of the meeting. And when people had finally drifted away and we were just standing there, I said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Well, I played the piano. I played earlier. Did you hear me?" And I said, "No, I just got here." And he said he would drop a tape off to my hotel. And I a week or so later, I had a chance to play it and hear it, and I was really impressed. And I thought, this is something this guy deserves to get out into the world. And so that began this, about a 2-year process of legalities and applications and paperwork and so on to invite Cyril to ultimately move to Boston to attend Berklee.
I'm so curious to know what was on the tape. What was
It was solo piano
uh-huh.
um, and jazz music. It was very much reminiscent of Keith Jarrett's solo piano style, and and it was very mature, which is this. I mean, you hear prodigy children frequently in the music world these days, and there's a big difference usually in whether they sound fully formed or mature as
Hmm.
players or not. And that really struck me was that, well, I would never have guessed I was listening to someone 12 years old. And that was a big sign to me that just what he wasn't just a prodigy in the usual sense, that he was the real thing. So that's what got me committed to trying to do something about it.
And Kirill, at that point, were you thinking more along the lines of pursuing a jazz career?
Well, started as so many children did in the Soviet Union with classical piano, but I was lucky also from the start, particularly with my mother, who was one of my teachers, not necessarily for piano, but for music, for ear training and harmony, all these things. And but also my teachers, my piano teachers, encouraged me early enough that since I got fascinated with the sound of jazz through some recordings of my parents in their LP collection, and so I tried to imitate the sound. And I think for a long time I had both an aspiration to be both or either, and also a certain lack of clarity of what was I going to be when I grow up. I'm still I'm still thinking what do I want to be when I grow up. But it was a bit of both. But of course I had a much more thorough training and much more opportunity to study classical music. And in some way, when Gary says that whatever I sat was solo piano, I basically, until I went to these jazz workshops in Poland after I won a classical competition in Poland, but through serendipity, the people that were organizing that were also organizing jazz workshops. I had never had really a chance to to play jazz with anybody else. So it was by necessity also solo piano. And of course, then through meeting Gary and then eventually coming to the States, that gave me the chance and the possibility to explore jazz, and for the first time to really study it and be surrounded by the environment of these incredible jazz musicians. So at the time, I wanted to do both, but I had much less of a pathway, if any, to to do jazz.
Yeah. Did you, when you met Gary, I mean, what are your recollections of that evening? And did you have any sense that this was a fateful encounter?
Well, I mean, the recollections are very vivid. And just taking a step back, so I told you when I left the Soviet Union for the first time for a trip, I got sent by my school, as was still sort of in the twilight of the Soviet Union. The school delegated you to go abroad. So I went abroad to a uh, piano competition for youth in Poland, and there met somebody who organized jazz workshops, where in fact professors from Berklee would come. And that was, I think, the summer before I met Gary. It's sort of November that we met in, I think, 92. And or maybe 91. And one of the things is that there were tapes, bootleg tapes, being sold literally on the pavement of these Polish cities where I've gone for about $1 a tape, which at that time was already enormous money for us because ruble was not convertible. So we barely had any dollars. But with whatever dollars I got also for the competition prize, I bought recordings like a very hungry person for this information, including Crystal Silence of Gary Burton, Chick Corea, and the Keith Jarrett Cologne concert, and so on and so forth. And so I told Manfred now, jumping to our release, I told Manfred that I feel like I owe him a little bit of money because I bought bootleg tapes for $1 in back in 91. So of course I knew what an amazing musician Gary is and what a legend he is, and I don't know if I felt it was fateful, but I felt a connection, and I felt that there was a lot of serendipity that I could speak English, and that I got a chance to be the translator, which I very much enjoyed. And I remember then making the tape for Gary, and so it was all filled with this, wonderment of where or whether it will lead to something. But in fact, as I've told Gary numerously, and it's the truth, our encounter really changed my life, and in every way, as a person, as a musician. So it was indeed incredibly faithful, and it's amazing how one doesn't always know what's how faithful an encounter may be.
Yeah, definitely. And so, Gary, you were at this point, were you president at
No,
Berklee?
I was a dean. Oh,
Okay.
wait a minute. Maybe I had become executive
I think
vice
you were the
president.
vice
Yeah,
president.
just
Okay.
at that time. I every decade at Berkeley, I seemed to change positions,
Right.
and the final one was I was the executive vice president, and I had just started that role at the time this all happened.
And there's long been a lot of outreach internationally from Berkeley, but I feel like
Mhm.
during your tenure, this became a real priority. But even still, this was an unusually complicated uh, case, right? Making the arrangements to bring Kirill and his mother to the States. I mean, it must have been a lot of bureaucracy and red tape.
Yeah, we had no guarantee that we would succeed. Uh, but a big help to this undertaking was the president of Berkeley at the time, Lee Burke, who was very sympathetic to the idea,
Hmm.
and thought this would be you know, with no claim to fame or anything for having taken on the attempt. We just thought it was it sounded like a good thing to do, and of course no one else had really heard Kirill's playing. I guess some of the Berklee teachers at the Polish camp had heard you play, but you were sort of an unknown when you arrived at Berklee, but then you quickly became a standout student. And even recently I even talked to a couple of teachers from that era who remembered you well, said, "Oh yeah, we definitely remember you went by the name Cyril then, Americanized your name to make it easier for people to remember what to call you." Um, but yeah, we didn't know if it would work or not, and I was really thrilled when the word came through that you were coming, and then of course things went on from there, and it obviously was well worth the effort. The
Mhm.
end
Well,
result,
thank you for,
the end
yeah,
result
thank
is
you for making this.
has proven that
Yeah,
many
but
times
from
over.
our side, I mean, it was the assistance and the initiative from Berklee, as represented by Gary and Lee Burke, and then the administration, was incredible. And still, it was not easy bureaucratically, because then we learned that 2 or 3 times the invitations and the letters from Gary were sort of conveniently ejected from our post box. They
Mm,
disappeared, though other letters definitely arrived. So it was specifically aimed what was coming through and what wasn't. And then we had to find a fax machine that somebody owned in Moscow, which was a big deal in the early 90s. And so to circumvent the post, and then go to the embassy and have the interview. But I must say also, when we look at it now, it's amazing that it worked, and it's amazing as a sign of let's say cultural dialogue and educational exchange. And how Berkeley and how the U.S. officials were able to interact and help in those days.
mm, yeah. Um, so when you get to Berkeley, you find yourself in an entirely different environment. You have peers, who are interested in both jazz and classical music. Um, and, you know, so on the one hand, I would imagine that you felt like the world had opened up, but I wondered, did you also feel like, this is like overwhelming, or this is like, coming from the environment where you had really focused study and a lot of sort of solitude to work things out, and then suddenly to have all of this um, available to you, like what was your response to that?
Well, I think I felt like at a sort of the world's most luxurious dinner, but with a kind of an all-you-can-eat option. So
Right.
so so I was just just drinking and eating it day and night, and so it was incredible. And in those days we still had Tower Records next door to Berkeley, so
Hmm.
so just this availability of the library, of the recordings in the store, and of all the faculty and the students, and the fact, well, how vibrant the Berkeley community can be. So this was just truly overwhelming, but in a positive sense. So I think it was also something that helped me overcome, the nostalgia and the anxiety of having left one's home country, and also so because I was just so enthused and enthusiastic about finally getting access. Like, I had this built up hunger for
Hmm.
information of all kinds, and also, I could get anything, a plethora. And so that was my feeling, and my impression. And one of the things that I recently remembered when Gary and I had a conversation about this, that and I still always think about that, vis-a-vis Berkeley, that, as you know, the students in most ensemble classes, the students play with the teacher.
Hmm.
It's in that sense, it's quite different than a standard, classical conservatory, where the teacher observes and critiques. And so this chance to play not only with peers, but also with the sort of senior practitioners of the art. That was
Right,
amazing.
right.
And of course, my lessons with Gary in his vice president's office were the absolute musical highlights.
Was there a point at which it became apparent that that the classical performance track was speaking to you? And so even as you were interested in jazz improvisation, really it was a classical career that you were pursuing.
Yeah, I mean, this is, yeah, I felt after about 3 years at Berklee, I felt, and I think this was not, it was a teenage feeling where, you think things are much more black and white. And, but I had a feeling, well, I have to make a choice. Both art forms are so involving, and one could do it day and night and still not have enough time for
Hmm.
one or for the other. And so possibly I also gave in a little bit into this, the prevailing opinion. It's like, well, you have to choose. I would probably give a student in my position at the time a slightly different advice, but I think it's difficult to get advice because there are so few people that do classical and jazz at a high level simultaneously. So I think,
Hmm.
when you spoke to jazz people, you got one side of it. When you spoke to classical people, you got the other side. But to get somebody that would, that had done both, the way there are very few people to advise. So at that point, I felt, well, I have to choose. And then after long deliberations, I thought, well, just the literature that we have as pianists in the classical repertoire is so, well, it's the best in the world as far as a solo instrument goes. I think it's not even
Hmm.
controversial to say, because we have more repertoire than violinists or cellists or anybody, and some of the best thoughts that composers have committed to paper are for the piano. So I thought in the long run, despite the great joy of improvising and that creative process, that I thought mm, sort of being a scholar of and practitioner of these pieces that are some of the highest thoughts of some of our greatest composers, that, well, maybe that's what calls me. I think now I would have told my younger self that there are ways to be less radical about that decision, but maybe it's fitting that at 16 or 17 I thought, well, there's a radical decision, but my stance essentially has been softening ever since. And more I think of, now we have a project that Brad Meldau and I do that involves more and more improvisation. Gary and I have done stuff in the past a bit, so my stance is softening, and I'm going more and more towards doing various things and not calling, am I in this world or in that world? It's about the particular piece.
Well, it's great to think that it's not as if it was a forked path and there was never a return, right? Like it's like that
No, I
there's
think this
no
is
going
part
back.
of the self-balancing now.
Hmm.
And so it's even therapeutic that we
Yeah.
release this chicks piece.
Well, so before we talk about the piece, one more question. I'm glad that you mentioned sort of the teenage feeling because we haven't talked much about the fact that you were so young and you were 12 when Gary heard you. You were 14 when you came to Berklee. And Gary, you've, as a former prodigy yourself and someone who has worked with a number of really talented young musicians. Like, I wonder if you have any particular perspective on Kirill at that age, and what his growth was like, what his learning was like as you were mentoring him.
Well, when I uh, was interacting with Kirill at Berkeley, I only knew him as a jazz musician.
Hmm.
So it was, and I remember hearing that he had graduated and he had gone on to Manhattan to get his master's degree. And then I sort of lost touch with where he was from that point on temporarily, um, and didn't realize he was focusing on the classical side. And then next thing I knew, he had won a big competition somewhere, and I said, "Oh, there's Carol again." And now he's, making a name for himself in the classical field. How great, and as he mentioned, how rare that is. I can count on one hand the pianists who do both. classical and jazz, or any instruments. Frankly, it's it's a rare uh, uh, double talent that only a few have had. And in fact, I've wanted to ask Kirill uh, all along. You approached me in around 2011, I'm going to say, with the idea of asking Chick to write a piece, to be commissioned for a piece, and I said, and would I, find out if Chick would be open to such a thing, and I did talk to him about it, and he was receptive. So I told you to go ahead and contact him and see what you could work out. And I've always wondered, how much of a conversation did you have with Chick about, the piece you were requesting? Did you just sort of leave it up to him completely, or did you have some guidelines as to what you were looking for? What kind of things did he have to say about it?
Yeah, well, I think it's all part of that working out of this, the non-extant or porous borders between jazz, so-called jazz and classical, or so-called improvised and composed or written out music. So when I approached Chick, I went to meet him at Blue Note. I remember this very well, and heard a fantastic concert of his. I had, the nice recommendation letter, so to say, from you. And so he welcomed me backstage, and then I spent a wonderful and memorable hour or so in his dressing room, and described him a little bit, my path, and what a hero he has always been for me, and told him that, I play written down music, but at the same time, I'm not absolutely unversed in notes coming from other places than just written down dots on the page. And also I told him that I was interested with the money from the Gilmore Award, that I was interested to commission various composers, and there are some established classical composers, but I said that it was also interesting for me to provoke a great improviser such as himself, to have the time to notate and work out certain things compositionally, and what that would do to his creative process. Of course, Chick was and is a composer, but still, I think these longer form concert pieces were not always sort of the bread and butter of what he did every week. So
Mhm.
that seemed interesting to him, and I said, I want to be challenged by anything he writes in terms of written down notes for the piano. I'll try my best, and also want to be challenged as reconnecting to some of my roots as an improviser. And I think it was immediately in the air that it should be a duo piece for you and I, because Gary was sort of the connecting figure for this whole undertaking. So I think that emerged instantly, that this was going to be a piece for vibraphone and piano, and not just a solo piece or some other ensemble piece. And
Yeah.
then, other than that, I left it as I always thought, that when one commissions, just then be the catalyst and give the free reins to the muse. So other than that, I
Mm.
didn't tell him what I thought it should be. I just
Yeah.
said it can be anything on the scale of completely written out to completely improvised.
You know,
He
the
did. Oh,
go
he
no, go ahead.
did. He did call me after he had accepted the job and asked me what my thoughts were, and what it was. I did I have any requests or suggestions, and my reply was that I wanted him to make sure that you were, the main player, because it was your idea to do this, and I didn't want him to think that somehow, because if he and I had been friends and colleagues for so long, that he would feature me and you would be accompanying me, and I wanted to make quickly clear that that was not a good concept, that it should be uh, heavily featuring you, and if you ever had a decision between who to give more of the load to, I said, give it to Kirill. And
Yeah.
Well,
It's
and also, I do remember that he said. Now we're getting so closer and more concretely into the piece, but this kind of uh, Latin bass ostinato and whatever it is in 7/4 with this kind of metric asymmetry. He kind of said at the piano, he's like, "Well, this is the kind of stuff that I'm fascinated with right now," and he said, "You know, this is really challenging for me to sort of to improvise on a kind of looping groove, but one that's not in
Mhm.
a standard or common meter." And said, "So this is what I'm working out now." So like I think in a good piece, there is all of that. There is, you know, who it was written for, meaning Gary, who it was written for, meaning my peculiarities, and also luckily and wonderfully what was on Chick's mind as a musician, composer, and player himself.
Yeah.
Mm.
Listening to the piece for me is so it's almost surreal at times because there are two languages that I'm hearing, right? And one is um Chick's language at the piano. He has such a distinct harmonic vocabulary. There are certain gestural things that he does that he wrote into the piece. And so I very much feel that Chick Corea lives in this composition. And then the other language that's being spoken is this duo language that Chick and Gary have, that goes back so many decades um, and it is an established um, nothing sounds like it, right? The Chick Corea Gary Burton duo is like its own genre. And so it's really interesting to me to think about your like plunging into um this situation and and bringing all of yourself to this thing that also has these two other very, very strong musical personalities in it. And I wonder what your experience of that is. I mean, do you feel like you are in conversation with Chick as you're playing this piece?
Well, I did feel, and I do feel like it's, and I think this is what then links to my classical side of this
Hmm.
is what one practices every day. This, I think, calling interpreters is also a problematic word, but you try to become the conduit for maybe not even the person, but for the notes that this person produces.
Right.
And of course, it's clear that in case of Chick in this piece, as you say, one hears his language, one hears him at the piano. So it is an amazing
Mhm.
shape-shifting opportunity as a pianist to have this privilege to channel a great composer and a great composer pianist, and it's very
Hmm.
idiomatically written for the instrument. So I do feel that, and of course, then having grown up with, as you said, this um, genre, kind of an institution itself, the sort of the Burton Korea duo, and the sound, and so knowing it. So yes, I think there's, let's say, a modest part of so feeling like it's a conversation, but ever more so, it's recognizing the language and the fortune of being having the chance to channel Chick
Hmm.
in this case. And yet still I would say that as recognizable as he is, I think this composed language of the piece and some of these solo piano passages bring something else still that you didn't always necessarily hear in his improvised solos or intros. So he is also somewhat shape shifted by the process of composing this out.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Um, so help me understand the point at which the improvisation comes in, because I feel like there's a point over that ostinato when things seem to open up, but I could be misled about that. Does he create space for you to improvise, or is it more just elaborative?
Yeah, no, I can send you. I have the score that I referred to now when
Yeah.
we were mixing it with Manfred. I think there is, as far as I know, there's the sort of the opening cadenza which is written out completely. Then there
Hmm.
is the sort of the ensemble statement of the composed material, and then there is a kind of free moment where then Gary and I are really in the conversation in a way that we know from Gary's dose with Chick, who's sort of a free roaming kind of commenting thing, and then there's another piano section that's composed by Chick, and then we get to the Latin ostinato where I think the way Chick did it, that the bass line is written out for the piano, and I think there's some I don't think he writes out the comping, but there's the bass line, and Gary is suggested to play a solo, and then we switch places, and then there's a piano solo, and there were some suggested notes that, of course, Gary much elaborates on, and then there's a kind of closing coda that's written out. So in that sense, the piece really spans this from 100% composed to 100% improvised, and whatever is in between.
Yeah.
And Chick also told me, anytime you feel like deviating from what is written, feel free to do so.
Hmm.
So there are a few places. In fact, I would like to see the score again. To be honest, it occurred to me while I was listening to it recently that I wonder what was actually written, or whether how closely I adhered to it, or because I knew in some cases I was, taking liberties with it as we were creating each performance. Um, and I might back up and also describe how we went about learning it.
Please. Yeah.
Chick sent us the music, and I had it for about a week or 10 days before the rehearsal. We had planned to rehearse here in Florida at a friend of mine that had a grand piano, so I arranged they were going to be gone for the day, so I got a key to the house and had the piano tuned, and we were going to spend that day, playing the piece together for the first time. And Kirill had been in, I think it was Sarasota, Florida, playing a concert a couple of days earlier, and spent a day practicing his part or learning his part in preparation. So we didn't have a lot of time, like months in advance of practice time or preparation time. It was fairly quickly brought together. And we had that one day of rehearsal here in Florida. And then we performed it the first time in Berklee, in Boston. And then later, a few months later, I guess it was, went to the Gilmore International competition in 2012 and performed it the second time, which is where the recording came from, which we didn't really know about until recently. But again, listening to the recording, noting that we hadn't had a lot of time to work on it, to develop it further, to polish it, and so on. I was half expecting it to sound like it had rough edges here and there, but it doesn't. That was this big surprise when hearing the recording, was how settled and comfortable and confident the performance comes off. Given that, normally a piece like that you would maybe played it at 20 or 30 times in concerts, getting used to it, and so on. But in this case, we did it very quickly, and I was really blown away, frankly, by how good it sounded.
Yeah. Did Chick have a chance to hear one of those two performances?
Carol.
Yeah, actually, very, very, very much so. First of all, I think even on that day in Florida that Gary just told you about, we made, like, at the end of the day after we worked, we made a very rough run through and sent it to Chick, and I have the email exchanges, and he gave a few comments, and I think we were able to incorporate these comments for the performance several weeks later at Berklee. And then I sent him the recording from Berklee, which he was very approving of, and he still had a few suggestions. And then, fortunately, then the Gilmore performance was still maybe 2 months later, a month and a half later, and I did send him the unmixed sort of radio broadcast that we had right after that concert, and I do have the email from him that says something. Well, now you know, sounds great. I enjoyed listening to this. Now you both really got it.
Uh-huh.
And so
That's great.
we have the stamp of approval from the great man.
Yeah.
It's very sweet to have it. And as I was looking things up related to this release, I said I want to see what is still in my mailbox from Chick. So there's all that kind of little chronicle of those few months with the genesis and the gestation of the piece.
Yeah. Well, it's really it's a remarkable story. It's a beautiful performance and piece of music, and so I'm so grateful to both of you for, for taking some time to talk about it and for choosing to share it with the world. It's really special.
So
Oh,
thank you
thank
very
you.
much, Nate.